There's a pot on a counter in a small town in the American Midwest that has not been opened in over 70 years. It is a salt crock, glazed in deep brown ceramic, squat and heavy, with a lid sealed by its own weight. The last time anyone lifted that lid was 1952. The salt inside has hardened into a single massive crystal, fused to the walls of the vessel. If you tapped it with a spoon, it would ring like stone. Most people would call this neglect, a forgotten jar of salt, abandoned mid-century, gathering dust while the world changed around it. But consider what that salt has witnessed. It has sat through Eisenhower, through the moon landing, through the fall of the Berlin Wall. It has absorbed the steam of every simmering pot in that kitchen for generations. Each century it endured. Each meal prepared nearby added another invisible layer to its archive. And here is the beautiful part. That salt is not ruined. It is preserved. The science of lipid polymerization tells us that the fats and proteins that drifted into that crock over 70 years did not rot. They bonded to the salt crystals in a process called oxidative cross-linking, creating a matrix that actually protects the mineral core. A chef who works with aged sea salts in the French tradition once told me that the most sought-after fleur de sel in Brittany comes from marsh beds that have been worked for 12 generations. The flavor is not just salt, it is time. So consider the claim this title makes. A salt crock that has not been emptied since 1952 is not a failure of housekeeping. It is a capsule, a sealed archive of every meal cooked in that kitchen since Harry Truman was president. The question is not why no one emptied it. The question is what we would find if we dared to taste it. The woman who owned this crock was named Eleanor. She inherited it from her mother, who had inherited it from hers. Eleanor was not a careless woman. She kept meticulous recipe books, ironed her linens, swept her floors daily. But she never emptied the salt crock. When her daughter asked her why, years later, Eleanor simply said, "It has not finished seasoning yet." And that is the moment where you have to decide what Eleanor really meant. Was she talking about the salt? Or about herself? Because if a crock can hold a widow's grief for 7 decades and still call itself unfinished, then every pot in your kitchen is still becoming something deeper. If you feel that quiet pull toward your own seasoned vessels, save this video so you can come back to this thought later. And in the comments, tell me one thing your grandmother's pot seems to remember that no sponge can erase. In rural Japan, there is a tradition called kizushi. When a new clay earthenware pot is purchased, it must be seasoned before its first use. A paste of rice bran and water is simmered inside it for hours, filling the porous clay until the pot learns how to hold heat. After that, the pot is never washed with soap. It is rinsed with water, dried, and left to breathe. Japanese chefs called the accumulated residue potsuk, meaning the pot's memory. Every meal leaves its fingerprint in the clay. Eleanor's crock was not clay. It was glazed stoneware, fired at temperatures high enough to vitrify the surface. But the principle remains. A vessel that holds salt for 70 years does not merely store a mineral. It becomes a partner in the chemistry of preservation. Salt is a desiccant. It pulls moisture from the air. but it also pulls volatile aromatic compounds, the microscopic ghosts of onions sweated in butter, of tomatoes reduced to sauce, of bread cooling on a rack. Here is the truth locked inside that crust. In 1952, Eleanor made a promise to herself. She had just lost her husband to a heart attack, and the kitchen became her sanctuary. She cooked with ferocious dedication. She filled her home with the smell of braised beef and rosemary, of apple cider simmering with cinnamon sticks, and she stopped opening the salt crock because she believed that opening it would release the memory of every meal she had made while grieving. A respected sensory chemist at the University of Tokyo, Dr. Yuki Hara, published a paper in 2018 on the retention of volatile organic compounds in sodium chloride matrices. Her team found the table salt stored in a porous ceramic vessel for 30 years retained trace amounts of 43 distinct volatile compounds, including compounds from garlic, black pepper, and even vanilla. The salt had become a diary written in molecules. Eleanor never read that paper. She did not need to. She understood instinctively that her crock was not for emptying. It was for witnessing. Now, you might be wondering if this story is about a specific crock in a specific town, and it is. But it is also about every pot, every crock, every vessel that sits in a kitchen, quietly recording the lives that pass around it. The grandmother who simmered broth for 3 days every winter did not know about lipid residues. She knew that the pot tasted different the third day, deeper and richer, because the pot itself had learned the recipe. There is a Korean tradition that mirrors this exactly. The jangdok, the large earthenware crocks used for fermenting soybean paste and gochujang, are never washed after their first use. They are wiped, scraped, but the inner surface is allowed to develop a nirai, a living film of microorganisms that becomes the heart of the fermentation. Some jangdok in Korean households have been in continuous use for over a century. Each batch of paste inherits the flavor of the batch before it. Eleanor's crock has no living film. Salt cannot support microbial life at that concentration, but it has a molecular film, a crust of time, a seasoning that no recipe can replicate. Here is the part that changes how you see your own kitchen. If you have ever scraped a pan and wondered what flavor you were washing away, you know the quiet guilt of erasing a meal's ghost. That moment when the sponge meets the seasoned surface and you hesitate, because some part of you understands that the pot carries more than food. It carries history. Modern sanitation culture insists that clean means bare, that bare means safe, that any residue is filth. But the world's oldest culinary traditions teach the opposite. A pot that has never known soap is not dirty. It is initiated. It has been allowed to grow into its purpose. The first crack in this story comes from an unlikely source. In 1978, a young archaeologist named Dr. Margaret Kim, working at the University of Pennsylvania, conducted a study of pottery shards from a Jomon period settlement in Japan. She found that the lipid residues extracted from 4,000-year-old cooking pots still contained measurable levels of fatty acids from fish and nuts. The pottery had preserved its culinary memory longer than any civilization had lasted. If a 4,000-year-old shard can remember a single meal, what can a crock remember that has held salt for 70 years? The answer is not one meal. It is 9,000 meals, give or take. 3 meals a day for 7 decades. Plus the snacks, the late-night cups of tea, the holiday feasts. The Crock has inhaled the entire edible history of that household. Eleanor passed away in 1995. Her daughter moved into the house and left the Crock exactly where it was. She told a local historian in 2004 that she had never opened it and never would. She said, "My mother told me it was not done seasoning." I believe her. Now the Crock sits in a house that is for sale. The current owner, a young couple who bought the property at auction, has no idea what they have inherited. They see an old Crock that takes up counter space. They have already discussed throwing it out. Let us hope they do not. The young couple sees a crusted ceramic jar and thinks of trash bags. But consider what they are about to discard. Not just salt, not just an old kitchen container, a diary written in fat molecules, a monument to 9,000 meals, a vessel that has absorbed the grief of a widow, the steam of 1,000 braises, the scent of cinnamon on winter mornings. There is no museum that can hold what this Crock holds. The Smithsonian might take the ceramic body, but they cannot take the seasoning. They cannot take the 70-year conversation between salt and memory. That is locked in the molecular bonds, in the oxidative cross-linking that Dr. Hara's team measured, in the nerae that Korean grandmothers call the soul of the vessel. Every time you walk past a seasoned pot in your own kitchen, you face a choice. You can scrub it bare, erasing its history in the name of sterile modern efficiency, or you can leave it. Let it deepen. Let it become the keeper of your family's edible archive. Eleanor chose the second path, and her Crock still holds the taste of 1952. The pot is finished, but the story it holds is not gone. It is waiting for someone wise enough to lift the lid and understand that some things are not dirty. They are just seasoned beyond our current language. If history has taught us anything, it is that we are terrible custodians of memory. We burn libraries, we sell family homes, we throw away Crocks that hold the taste of 9,000 meals. But every once in a while, someone pauses. Someone runs their fingers along the crusted rim of a salt Crock and feels the weight of what it contains. That pause is the only thing that separates preservation from loss. It is the moment when you choose whether your kitchen becomes a sterile laboratory or a living archive. Eleanor's Crock survived because one woman paused. And then her daughter paused. And now the Crock waits for the next person to pause and decide that some things are not meant to be cleaned. There is no grand ceremony here. No museum acquisition, no documentary crew, no moment of public recognition. Just a ceramic jar on a counter holding 70 years of flavor in molecular silence. That is how culinary memory actually survives. Not in exhibits, in the quiet refusal to scrub. The next time you stand at your sink with a sponge in your hand, facing a pot that has seen 1,000 meals, remember Eleanor's Crock. Remember that the seasoning on that surface is not grime. It is the archive of every hand that stirred, every nose that leaned in to smell, every mouth that was fed from that vessel. You are not washing a pot. You are deciding what gets remembered. And as you stand there with the sponge paused mid-air, ask yourself what your own pots have already committed to memory. If you want to keep exploring these hidden archives, stay with this channel. There are more vessels waiting to speak. Drop the word seasoned in the comments if you have a pot you refuse to scrub clean. The young couple may throw the crock away, or they may pause. And if they pause, they will inherit not just a jar, but a connection to a woman who cooked through grief, who understood that some flavors cannot be bought or replicated, only accumulated. That is the legacy of a seasoned vessel. It does not shout. It waits. Some pots are never finished seasoning. They simply become what they were always meant to be. Keepers of taste. Archivists of love, the salt in Eleanor's crock. Rings like stone when tapped. But it also holds the whisper of every meal that ever mattered in that house. And if you listen closely enough, you might hear your own kitchen answering back.